All right, so I want to go over some of the questions that I've received on how to do part 2 of the geologic timeline. So you should have step 1 totally done, and to make that happen, you would have your 4 complete lines near the top, and then you have kind of a 5th partial line here at the bottom. And it's going to end a little bit past halfway on your paper, and then that bottom rightmost line is going to say present day. That's basically where we are today. Then in the upper left-hand corner, we have Earth forms about 4.6 billion years ago. And then in the furthest left-hand column, you have your scale. Okay, so those are the things that we're going to be using today. The scale, and then the fact that Earth forms in the upper left corner, and then we have our present day down here in the bottom, roughly right-hand corner. So the way I usually describe how to read the timeline is thinking of it like reading a book. So in the upper left-hand corner, just like you'd start a book in the top left corner of the page, the story of Earth kind of starts in that upper left-hand corner. And then as you read through time, you're reading from left to right, and then when you get to the end of that line, you move down to the next line. Okay, so I'll kind of show you what that looks like in just a little bit here. But some of the questions I've been receiving about step 2 have to do with, well, how do we measure? How do we measure back in time? And the key to that is remembering that if we're talking about something that happened 2 million years ago, or 20 million years ago, or 4 billion years ago, all of those are referencing how many years from today, okay? And that brings us to what I'm asking you to do for step 2, is to mark out these different time periods and how many years ago they began, okay? So we're going to start with the first one here. The first time period that is on your direction sheet, this is 2B, is the Quaternary period. And that period began 1.8 million years ago. So again, that means 1.8 million years from today. So in green here, I'm going to mark present day. Uh-oh, some technical difficulties here. Hold on. Okay, so in green, I'm going to mark present day just to help kind of highlight that. All right, and what we're going to do is measure back from that green mark for present day 1.8 million years ago. Well, if you remember back in your scale, 1 million years is equivalent to 1 millimeter. So because we're looking at 1.8 million years, we're looking at 1.8 millimeters. Now, there's a little bit of estimation going on. It's not the end of the world if you just say, okay, 2 millimeters is pretty close to that. So from this green mark, which represents present day, I'm going to have you measure back 1.8 millimeters. And let's say that's right about there. So what that means is in between this red mark and the present day mark, the green mark, we have our Quaternary period. Okay, so that means that according to our scale, 1.8 millimeters or 1.8 million years ago, the Quaternary period started, and it is still going on today. So it goes all the way up to present day, which is where we are now, right? So then if you look at your direction sheet for your timeline, 2C has you mark the next time period, okay? And this is where some people get a little bit mixed up. The next time period is called the Tertiary time period. Now this is the time period that happened before the Quaternary period, right? And that's where sometimes people get a little bit mixed up. So the Tertiary period The direction sheet says it started 65 million years ago. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to think about that. 65 million years ago, just like we measured with the Quaternary period, is equivalent to 65 millimeters. Now that's a pretty good number of millimeters. Unless you're super bored and you want to count up all those tiny little marks on your metric ruler, what you can do is kind of use the metric system to your advantage, and 65 millimeters is actually the same as 6.5 centimeters. Okay, so whether you measure 65 millimeters or 6.5 centimeters, you're going to get to the same spot. But here's the thing, we need to measure from present day, because 65 million years ago is 65 million years ago from where we are right now. Okay, so this one is going to take us a little bit further back, further to the left. I'll mark this one in blue. And we're going to measure from the green mark of present day and go back 65 millimeters or 6.5 centimeters. And that'll bring us right about here. So what that means is right in this area between the blue and the red mark is our tertiary period. Okay, that means from the blue mark to the red mark, that's the entire length of the tertiary period. So it began at the blue mark, it ended at the red mark, and coincidentally, that's when the next time period began. So that's the other thing to remember, is that when one chunk of time ends, in this case time periods, another one begins. There's never a gap where there's nothing. So when one starts, that means the previous one has ended. And the thing that you're going to come to find out is that a lot of these time periods, and then later on you'll see these eras and these eons, they all have something important that kind of triggered the end of one and the beginning of another one. It could have been a mass extinction. It could have been a big change in the types of plant or animal life that were on Earth. It could have been a big change regarding how the Earth functioned, maybe the amount of oxygen in the air, or the makeup of the atmosphere, or something about land masses changed. All of those are big enough events that a new time period may be starting, or a new era, or possibly a new eon. Okay, so what you're going to do is you are going to be using this other document here, which I posted on Google Classroom, and you are going to get the time, the amount of time from present day that these different time periods began. So we already did the Quaternary period. Let me mark this up a little bit for you. Okay, so we already did the Quaternary period right here. Okay, and that was 1.8 million years ago, or 1.8 millimeters. And then right after that, we marked the Tertiary period, and that was 65 million years ago, or the equivalent 6.5 centimeters. It's the same thing as 65 millimeters. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do now is to go through all of these other time periods, looking at when they began, and then marking those accordingly on your timeline. Okay, so all through the yellow, the blue, and the green time periods. Okay, what you're going to do after you get those time periods marked, and just so you know, all of these time periods are going to be on that bottom-most line. None of these time periods go back far enough that you have to worry about going to a different line. Okay? After you do those time periods, we're going to kind of chunk them together into a bigger piece of time that we call an era. All right? And I'll mark these in a different color. Okay? So the Tertiary period and the Quaternary period put together is what we call the Cenozoic era. These other three periods in blue, the Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic, are what we call the Mesozoic era. And then these bunch of time periods in green here, all lumped together, are what we call the Paleozoic era. And that kind of indicates that they have some similarities. Some similar things are going on there. So when you go from one era to the next era, that means that something pretty significant changed or was different about life here on Earth in order to kind of indicate that a new era was about to begin. Okay? Now, the other thing that's kind of on the bottom here has to do with eons. You can kind of see the in purple down here, the different eons. These are bigger chunks of time, and you'll notice these go back significantly farther, not just a handful of centimeters. Now we're looking at 250 centimeters here, 380 centimeters there, and actually 460 centimeters right there. So that is going to ask you to go back significantly farther on your timeline. So let me show you kind of what that might look like. All right, so we'll come back here to our original timeline, and just so you kind of have some markers of where different things should end up if you're measuring correctly. Okay, remember, if we go back to our scale over here, okay, let me make this a little bit bigger for you. If we go back to our scale, we already know 1 millimeter equals a million years. 1 centimeter, if you didn't remember, equals 10 million years. And one full, and by full I mean a full 100 full-length centimeter line, equals 1 billion years of time. Okay? So, with that, I want to point out a couple things for you. Okay? So if we have our 4 full lines at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then our bottommost line is just kind of that partial line, that's how we get the 4.6 billion year amount of time that Earth has existed. Okay? So a couple tricks for you here. Let's see, what color haven't we really used here? I'm going to do green again. So if we take the green mark here, the present day, okay, and we just take that straight up, basically what we're doing is we're, by default, measuring 100 centimeters of time, because we have our 60 centimeter chunk of time on the bottommost line, and then we have this other chunk of time to the right on the second line from the bottom. That's should be 40 centimeters if we measured everything correctly, right? So 60 plus 40 is 100 centimeters, and we said 100 centimeters equals 1 billion years. Okay? So if you need to mark something, or you want to mark something on your timeline that happened around 1 billion years ago, you're going to be in this neighborhood on your timeline. And we can just take that further. If we go up the same amount, this next line, the same mark right above that, that would be 2 billion years ago. Okay, the next one after that would be 3 billion years ago, and the next one after that would be 4 billion years ago. And then you'll notice that we have this little, this little area left over over here. I'll mark that in yellow maybe. Okay, so this last little chunk of time, man, I'm really doing a great job. This last chunk of time over here, this is where we get our 4.6 billion years. Okay, because 4 billion years is right where I marked it in green, and then the remainder, the 4.6 billion years, is over here. Okay, so over here is super duper old, and then down here in the bottom right area, this is new. That's present day. So when you think about how to read or how to use the timeline, that's how you should think about it. Is the stuff that happened a long, long time ago, it's going to be further to the left, and it's going to be higher up on your timeline. The things that are relatively recent, and when I say relatively recent, I mean like, maybe they happened a couple million years ago or 20 million years ago, those are going to be further towards the bottom and usually further to the right. Okay? So the best analogy I can think of for you is think of your timeline like a book. The stuff that happened very, very early on is going to be higher on the lines and usually further to the left. And then the things that are further to the right and on the lower lines are things that are more recent. Okay? So if you found this helpful, we can put together some other videos similar to this. And certainly if you have questions, please email your teachers, and we'll be happy to help you out with anything specific. But hopefully this video answers some of those kind of big common questions that people have about their timeline. So keep at it. If you got questions, ask. We're looking at trying to get this timeline done before the end of the week. And then we're going to have a little kind of check-in quiz for you where you can actually use your timeline to answer some questions about Earth's history on Friday or, right around Friday. A little bit of flexibility this first week of online school. So have fun, ask questions when you have them, be safe, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.